Okay, this is a take two. Uh, our original efforts had no sound, which was definitely problematic. So now that we have sound, we're all good to go. We have excellent internet connectivity. It's all good. I am Sean D. Francis, and I am a dungeon master here in Chicago, and I run a D&D campaign for some of my friends. And I also run D&D campaigns online for strangers and friends. This particular stream is a campaign diary of what is going on in my current campaign that I have. It's the main campaign. It's called Shardhaven, thus Shardhaven Campaign Diary. We just hit our third session of the campaign, and this is one adventure that went over three sessions. It was only meant to be one session. That is not a complaint. As a dungeon master, that meant that I prepared for 1.5 sessions and I got 3 sessions out of it, and that is a great return on investment of my time. So, before we jump into what happened in this session, let's do a little backstory here. The adventurers were hired by a group of farmers to help with a hobgoblin problem. When the adventurers got to the farmland, they asked some pertinent questions like, why isn't the Duke of the land helping with this? What's going on there? And it really boiled down to the Duke was busy with other things, didn't have the forces to spare. So the farmers raised money to hire the adventurers and said, adventurers, go deal with our weird hobgoblin problem. So they went, and that was the last session. Was they went into the forest and had some forest encounters. It was the goal of that session was to turn a forest exploration into a mini dungeon. I set it up with clear forest paths and clearings and traps and things to discover. So as they explored the forest, and I used Fog of War, I used Owlbear Rodeo as our virtual tabletop, and I applied the fog. And so as they're moving through, they're uncovering the paths, and it was maze-like, but everything led into where the encounter was. It was just depending on what side paths they went onto, it could uncover certain events, certain things. There's pit traps, and basically it's an inhabited forest of sorts. So there was other things besides the hobgoblin threat to be concerned with. They finally had their encounter in the clearing, and they caught a goblin prisoner, and that led to what do you do with goblin prisoners? And that's an interesting thing because in video games, in games in general, you just kill everything. You don't get into situations where the things are surrendering or you got you've blinded them and have them prone. What do you do now? And that is part of the ethical dilemma of D&D that I absolutely love. What do you do? Like, if you let them go, they're still a threat, but are you the kind of person that would just kill a completely helpless innocent thing? So they dumped the goblin in a pit trap that they had come across, just kind of a temporary holding cell, which led to hopefully some interesting character conflict down the road. We'll see. That's always one of those interesting aspects of it. So if you are watching this on Twitch right now, I do have the D&D Beyond overlay applied, so you can go in and take a look at the characters in the game and their current stats right now. The hit points of that are how they ended the last session. We did have a player death, not death, but got to the point of death saving throws. It was, well, we'll get into it. It was one of my more interesting encounters in terms of how the players dealt with it. The map of the encounter is kind of right there. It was a very straightforward encampment setup, but because the players took so long getting there and they had goblins from the previous encounter escape, the hobgoblins here were completely set up and ready for them. They were expecting this assault, essentially. Not to the degree that they should have been. I didn't want to, I could have been a real jerk about this whole thing and set up like roadblocks and really taken away any element of surprise that the players could have had. But really, I just had it set that the hobgoblins were ready and waiting for them. So as soon as they were aware of the player's presence, things could happen. And one of the things that happened is these hobgoblins had a chimera, and were using the chimera to. That's what they were going to use as their final assault against the farmers in the farmland. So the players come in, they heard the chimera, and this was one of my faults. On Alberta Rodeo, you can hide icons of the characters, and I forgot to unhide the chimera icon, so the players were confused there for a little bit. But I had the chimera up on the mountaintop. Part of what was going on was if they had a chance, the chimera was going to come down, make an attack, and it was going to retreat back up to the mountaintop, and there's only one way to get up to the mountaintop easily. Otherwise, it would have to go through all sorts of rough terrain, and there'd be other attacks for the chimera to make flying assaults against the player characters. That was the original plan. I keep forgetting, my players don't want to enter battle. They will do everything to stand in the safest, most protected spot and snipe. And that's why I made the distances so far that they couldn't snipe, and I made it that the hobgoblins weren't going to chase them out of the camp, chase them. The players would have to go into the camp at some point if they wanted to win this encounter. But boy, they stuck right down here. And that was the other thing with the chimera was I figured, okay, if they bunch up down here, the chimera can get several of them in one shot, and did. I was able to get that off. What I wasn't counting on was even with the chimera flying as fast as it could, which I had a dash, which was 120 feet from the mountaintop down. It took too long to get into combat. I should have changed that. That was a regret on my part. I did have other goblins stationed around, and they came in from behind, trying to goad the players to at least get into the map, essentially. And they eventually did. But then the chimera came in and was able to get a shot off. One of the things I love about hobgoblins is their martial advantages. And if a hobgoblin hits, like, it does all this extra damage. And I had a hobgoblin captain, so I was able to give bonuses to its hobgoblin subordinates. The unity of the encounter seems great to me. Problem, I have horrible dice rolls. So I was using the new D&D Beyond encounter dice roller. So I like to roll in my previous campaign, I wouldn't roll in the open, but I never fudge my dice rolls. I will fudge pretty much everything else but dice rolls. I figure, why roll the dice if I'm just going to fudge it? And I need to be kept honest. I will start fudging in favor of the characters because I start getting worried for the characters. I don't want the characters to die. But then that removes a lot of the fun of the game. I mentioned before in the previous campaign diary, failure is where the fun is. Having to make death saves is part of the game and is part of the fun, and how a character reacts to being on death's door. Do they feel emboldened? Do they feel shook? Do they shrug it off and say, yeah, that was nothing. Like, that is a character building moment. And if I am fudging the dice rolls, I am robbing the players of those moments. The problem is when I'm rolling in public and I'm just rolling awful. Like these hobgoblins weren't hitting anything, and I only needed them to hit just a couple times to do some significant damage. The player characters are 5th level. They're not sitting there with a ton of hit points. The Chimera is coming in with over 100 hit points, but it's pretty easy to hit. I felt like it was a well-balanced, deadly encounter if the hobgoblins would hit. I have strikers. I have the rogue artificer character able to do significant amount of damage in one turn. You know, with sneak attack and other aspects. I have 3 characters who are casting hex, and those hexes go off, and then that adds extra damage per successful attack roll. Like it accumulates fast, and boy, I was nervous that this was just going to be a nothing encounter. The Chimera was able to land, able to get a fire breath off. That did a significant amount of damage. Took one of the characters down to almost 2 after a claw attack as well. Full fire breath and a claw attack. Got the monk down to 2 hit points. And that's when things started getting interesting. The ranger was attacked and fell, went to 0 hit points. The Hexblood Wizard was able to use a Transference of Life spell to drain herself. So super risky because it's 48 damage that her character takes to then give those hit points to somebody else. If she rolled super high, she could have killed herself. And that was a fascinating character decision. So the monk was able to heal up. There is a healer, a sister cleric, an NPC, sister cleric, a cleric, Sister Maton, who really was there because I knew there's some really squishy characters in this party, and I wanted to make sure that there was somebody there who could buff them up. I also wanted to demonstrate the power of the buffs, of you don't necessarily need a character to be dealing damage if the character is there who can really like help another character avoid all sorts of damage. And she was able to do that a couple times and help with saving throws and that sort of thing. So the sister cleric character was able to heal up the wizard. So even though like it really, things went separated dramatically. We had characters who were down to almost no hit points, and then other characters who had most of their hit points. And that was fascinating to me. I was expecting to be a little bit more spread out, but it just was the way. Like my hobgoblins with their own arrows weren't hitting anybody. Now the monk had an 18 armor class, and that is difficult to hit. But like the ranger had an armor class of 12. That they should have been hitting a lot more, but just the dice rolls, I just was not hitting. And I don't want to fudge in favor of the monsters because the tide can turn, and then suddenly I'm having to fudge in favor of the players to balance that out. The one thing I did do is earlier they were back in the other forest, and they decided to explore more of that forest, and there was a abandoned shack that was pretty much just a floorboards, and the floorboards were old, and it was easy to see that you could go crashing through the floorboards into kind of the sub-cellar. What I did was it was just a 4-foot drop, which meant that if you were over 4 feet tall, in order to do melee in that area, you're going to be at disadvantage because you're stooping down and you have to kind of not easy to use your weapons or anything like that. So the characters did go down to explore this area, and there was an ooze, a black pudding down there. But my encounter using D&D Beyond, the encounter setup, I wasn't prepared for them to do this. I thought they were just going to move on into the main encounter, so I didn't bother setting it up. And I was having some problems, and I couldn't remember what the armor class of the ooze was. And one of the characters was already attacking, and I said it was a low enough roll. It was a 12 to hit or something. I'm like, oh, that wouldn't have hit. Well, the Black Pudding has an armor class of 7. Of course it would have hit. So I had to make that adjustment. But the fact of that, there was nothing down there. There was no reason for them to be down there. I let them know right off that, like, you can get out of this pit anytime you want. The ooze may chase you, may not, but you do not have to be down here. And it was one of those things, they rarely take my advice. They really they took the hint. They're like, yeah, wait, what exactly? It's not threatening anybody. What is going on here? But of course, as they leave, they say, well, let's just burn it down. Set it on fire. Fire, yeah, fire. So it is what it is. So they do eventually get into the main encounter, but that was an example where I adjusted the armor class, and that was just because I screwed up on the estimate. But then I set it at 12. You get above a 12, you hit it. And it wasn't a big deal. I mean, Black Pudding had so many hit points, no big deal. The one thing I really kind of wanted to do was damage equipment. So I got to damage the ranger's short swords that she was using against it. Each one took 1 point is now 1 point less effective in causing damage. And that's the interesting thing. It's just now I have to remember to go into D&D Beyond to make that adjustment to her weapons. But you can do that. You can do that in D&D Beyond, and I love that. This is not a commercial for D&D Beyond. I know I'm using their overlay. I know I'm extolling the virtues of using it for running an encounter, but it was just a nice setup on that. So I gave them 5 minutes. I set a timer and said, okay, you have 5 minutes to come up with a battle plan of how you are going to do this. And their original plan was they were going to come in and take up spots, and that never manifested. I was a little bit of a dick. I didn't mean to be a dick, but I was like, you can't waste time. Like, make decisions and move forward. That's life. So they muddled through the first 2 rounds of combat, and then finally got into it. And when they got into it, like, they do enough damage that these are hobgoblin, 11 hit points. Hard to hit, but 11 hit points. Hit them, and they go down. The captain was more difficult, like 39 hit points. And then the Chimera with 119 hit points. But this was definitely well within their wheelhouse if they would have coordinated their attacks a little bit. And they didn't. They did it and they didn't. There's still a lot of figuring out their characters and how to time things out in terms of bonus actions and actions. They were in control of this encounter, I would say 75% of the time. There was only little moments where dice rolls could have gone horrible and it would have shifted completely out of their favor. But for the most part, they were always in control of this encounter, which I like. As a DM, I kind of like, because then I don't feel like I've screwed them over. I don't want the players to feel like I want them to feel challenged. I don't want them to feel like they're just screwed from the start. Like they had no chance at this. And it can happen. Like it doesn't take much to break a player's morale. So I try to buoy, but I also want them to feel challenged. I just don't want to hand them victories. I want them to muscle through it. I want them to feel like they're using these unique character abilities and playing it out. It's just like for some of the players, like they have my luck in rolls and they just can't hit with some of their more interesting abilities. So they never get to see what the interesting ability does. And then I'm afraid that they level up and they gain newer interesting abilities and you're not getting a chance to explore the character. So that's kind of, if I'm talking to players out there, don't feel like you need to level up so fast. Like, use those abilities, and it's okay to stretch yourself and try to get more action into a session. I don't always take in the short rests and that. It's okay to push yourself a little bit. It's part of the strategy of the game. But you want as many chances to use your abilities as possible so you understand what your abilities do. I think there's a lesson for DMs in there as well of it's okay to have trivial encounters. Like, not every encounter is a life and death encounter. Like, it's okay to just have those super easy to kill minion type encounters. So the players feel powerful, but it gives them a chance to experiment. It gives them a chance to use these abilities that may not work against a more powerful monster encounter. So in this encounter, this again, things I don't plan for. They caught the captain, a successful hold person spell, and they wrapped him up in rope and caught him. And I was expecting complete death. I was expecting him to wipe everybody out, and then explore the camp and find letters and documents, that sort of thing that would lead on for other adventures, other things. But they caught him and they brought him back to the farmlands. Basically, they were thinking in the pure sense of, here's our evidence that somebody in the farmlands had hired these hobgoblins, and so this fellow will vouch for that. Maybe not. May decide to start lying. We were running really late, so I'm like, I wasn't going to do any of the he's lying, you have to sort out the lie. Just kept it straightforward and simple. Basically, this hobgoblin, I gave additional motivation that this hobgoblin is part of a tribe of hobgoblins and owes tribute to the chieftain of that tribe. And that chieftain, not happy with the tribute that this hobgoblin was giving, kidnapped that hobgoblin's family and basically said, if you don't give me better treasure tribute, I'm killing your family. So there's the motivate. Like, it's not just random evil acts. It's, I need to earn money. I need to earn gold to give to the chieftain in order to save my family. And we have that whole complex structure. I just wanted to add that little flourish to it. But now we have a situation where they caught him live. He's going to be, at some point, say, if you don't let me go, my family's dead. Except he won't be saying that to the player here. I had the Duke's agents, a knight from the Duke's castle, come and kind of take charge, round things up, kind of tie a bow on everything, and hint at larger conflicts in the land. That was also a point where I could introduce this rough and tough character that the players don't have to like this character, but I want them to respect this character. So I played into that a little bit in the land, in the campaign setting. Tieflings are not well liked. There's this, somewhere in your bloodline, you had, one of your ancestors had dalliances with demons, and like it's an obvious thing, and it's a scarlet A kind of thing. So there's a lot of prejudice and that sort of thing. So some people carry that prejudice because the empire of the land does not condone tieflings. Like, if somebody is born a tiefling, they take the tiefling and they dump them on the outskirts of the wilderness. and it's no longer their concern. Which then we can pull at this thread. There's entire groups who go and rescue the abandoned tiefling orphans and give them a life and raise them. So it's not like there's a mass grave of tiefling infants. But there's this whole underground aspect to the empire with tieflings. But the anti-tiefling sentiment is there. So I had one of the retainers of the night voice an anti-tiefling sentiment, and then she strongly reprimanded him. So there's that moment of like, okay, she may be a hard ass, but she's a well balanced hard ass, a hard ass who you can at least respect, who isn't a complete lunatic or kind of the lawful good paladin who you don't want anything to do with. She's just a hard ass, and the nature of this NPC is she is battle worn. Her entire adult life has been spent kind of in combat, in battle, and she is desperate not to have that part of her life, but she's good at it. And that's the Duke relies upon her for maintaining his dukedom, the county. And she's just tired. And all this stuff is just wearing on her, and that's kind of the nature. She's the hardworking knight. I always think of the Canterbury Tales, the knight character in the Canterbury Tales, whenever I want to portray a nobly good, solid character, I think of that character in the Canterbury Tales, and it's the dented, dirty armor that is the symbol of this is a hardworking veteran of sorts, and that's how I describe her. Like she's got mud and blood. Basically, the idea is she's come back from one combat encounter, arrives at the castle, and is told, "Yep, you got to go to the farmlands and help the farmers there." And she's like, "Okay, I'm going off to help the farmers." Like it's just one thing after another after another. So there's a certain gratefulness that she has when she arrives, and she doesn't have to do anything. That these adventurers have solved the problem for her, and so she's invited them back to the castle, meet the Duke. This is kind of the generic social reward for helping out the region. And I don't have an epic campaign. This is going to be very episodic, very pieced together by the things that the players want to do. Part of this is so that they have this other warlord, chieftain, hobgoblin character out there. They may decide, like, you know what, let's go rescue this hobgoblin's family. They may decide, like, we just got to wipe out the hobgoblin threat entirely. They may ignore it because it's too far away, it's too much effort. One of the things they found in the hobgoblin camp was a map. And the map, it was unclear the situation of the map, how to orient it, what is what on the map. But it was found a distance away. And on the map, there's goblin notations about a human elf encampment, a loud human place. There may be roads, river. There's a spot that said fallen god, another spot that just said frog. And then in Draconic, as part of the original map, there's a spot that's labeled the Observatory of Rose. And I don't know if my players keep track of all these little things, but the whole idea of this campaign world is it. In the last campaign, there was a moment of essentially the entire multiverse being rewritten as magic poured through something called the Library of Rouse, which was this massive shard that basically showed what was going on all over all the planes, the multiverse of the entire D&D world. And this is my way, because I kind of wrote myself in a corner in that last campaign, and I wanted to restart. I wanted to restart in a way that was a little bit more open-ended, a little bit more weird. I just wanted things to be not so linear, not so cramped. I thought I was making it open. I thought I was creating all these interesting nooks and crannies, but we as players weren't engaged. And talking about me as a player, DM player, we weren't engaged together talking about the world enough for all these little threads to be meaningful on any level. We're playing 4 hours every other week, essentially, and it just was tough to get the nuances of these things out into the gameplay. So I just wanted to rewrite everything, but I also wanted to be able to draw in things that my original campaign world wouldn't allow. So that's the whole idea, is everything got rewritten. So now I have pieces of Greyhawk, I have pieces of Forgotten Realm, I have pieces of everything just kind of crammed together. It's been rewritten in this world, but also the things in the original campaign world were rewritten and woven into this world as well. So, and if the players are watching this, do watch this, they'll obviously the huge spoiler on this, but it should click in their mind of like, wait, Rouse, Library of Rouse, this is called the Observatory of Rouse. Is there a connection? Do we want to pursue this? Is there something there for us to discover? And obviously there is. There wouldn't be a map if there wasn't. But that's kind of laying that out. There's a couple things. So there's a lot of loose ends at this point. Threads that they can pull on. They're going to go visit the Duke. That'll bring up other events. There's a festival in their starting town, essentially, that they wanted to attend. That was part of our session 0, as I basically had the players create this festival. So this is their festival. This is their interpretation of a lunar festival. And I'm very eager to play it out. I have some things tapped in for that. There's learning about this observatory, the map, trying to place the map on the known world map. There's the greater hobgoblin threat. There's now also like rumors of bandits and that sort of thing. There's also everything I created in the original starting town that hasn't been touched yet, because I didn't expect us to go this long, this many sessions without starting another adventure. So again, not a complaint, because I just have so much built up that the players can just roll into one adventure after another adventure after another adventure. And this isn't even touching the player backstory yet. So there's backstory for all of the PCs. So one of the things I had in Session 0 was giving rumors and truths that all the PCs knew about other PCs. And I thought this will be an interesting way to start conversations and get... Now, it's an interesting idea as a concept. It just isn't coming to play. No one is saying, wait, I heard a rumor about you, or is it true that... I kept on expecting that to come up. And maybe it will further down the line, but we're going to have too much real life, real adventure stuff taking precedent, that original stuff just isn't going to come into play, I suspect. But it was an idea. I tried it. I wouldn't do it again. It's a little bit too much effort for no sincere payoff. I think everyone is still just a little bit nervous about engaging each other in any deep fashion. So we'll see. I'll see what I can do to make that happen in the future. But for the most part, it's probably just going to be NPC DM talking to the PCs about their backstory and history and that sort of thing. We were just having that conversation on Facebook a while back about today, in fact, about how to help the DM. And that's one of the ways you can help the DM is engage each other in conversation, because sometimes I am taking 5 minutes trying to sort out why my encounter thing isn't working the way it's supposed to be working. But that's neither here nor there. So our next session is, we're out of the Howling Forest. No one asked why the forest was called Howling, which I am grateful for. The original concept did have a howling element to it. Went Chimera instead. I thought a Chimera was more fun, but I didn't change the name from Howling Forest, so there we are. So in general, that's going to wrap that up. I only meant to speak for an hour, and we're just under an hour, and I don't have that much more to say, and no one is watching to ask questions, so I am going to just let this be the way it is. So thank you. This will be up on YouTube as they normally are in a couple days. And if you do have questions, if you want to talk about how I do certain things, why certain decisions were made, have questions about the characters that are in the game, I would love to engage in that kind of conversation as well. And any questions about the characters I can't answer, I can pass on to the players and get those answers to you. And that might help the players also think about their characters in different ways. So, in general, I was very excited about this session, wrapping up this adventure, eager to get on to the next adventure, eager to see how the players take this information and what they do with it. That's the most fun, because they know that this hobgoblin who was unable to fulfill his tribute to his chieftain, though his family is going to die now. Life is hard. So take care, everyone. I will chat with you in future streams. I got a D&D salvage stream I'm planning coming up. It is the Dungeoneer's Survival Guide that I'll be going over, which I think will be very interesting. And I got a bunch more stuff I want to talk about. And then I'm going to have just generic YouTube content coming up. And if you are interested in following more of my general writing in that, I publish at stygianlabyrinth.net. Stygianlabyrinth.net. I would spell it out for you, but that would take forever. And if you know how to spell Stygian with a Y, Stygian, I guess I am spelling it, and Labyrinth, stygianlabyrinth.net. That is where I publish my game information. So there we go. I'm going to sign off now. Y'all have a good night and take care.